Hello and welcome back to another episode of Raw and Real with Stefanie Fernandez. I'm Stefanie, your podcast host. I'm a rapid transformational therapist and founder of Your Freedom program. I help women returning to themselves on their healing journey. In this podcast, we give the stage to women who overcame adversity and trauma or difficult phases in their life. Be ready to get raw emotions from real people. The stories we share here are to inspire women just like you that anything is possible. In today's episode, we will be talking about codependent relationships. Codependency refers to a mental, emotional, physical, and/or spiritual reliance on either a partner, a friend, or a family member. But generally speaking, you can say that codependency incorporates aspects of attachment style patterns that are developed in early childhood. It can also overlap with other personality disorders, such as dependent personality disorder. But codependency really can come in any shape and all sizes of forms and varying levels of severity. So foundationally, it is due to poor concept of self and poor boundaries, including an inability to have an opinion or say no. I'm very excited today to have Melissa Byers on the show. Melissa freed herself from a codependent relationship, and I'm really looking forward to hear, and Melissa, how you did and how you're doing today and all the wisdom you can share with us and our audience today. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be a guest on your show. Thank you.
It's great because you're also an expert in subconscious transformation,
Mm,
and you facilitate really deep healing through somatic
mm,
embodiment practices. It sounds very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to learn more about that. So please
yeah.
tell us your story today.
Yes. I'm so excited. It's funny. Just before I came onto this podcast, I was like taking deep breaths and just talking about somatic therapy, just creating safety just within the body, just so I could come here and really show up in my state of being, in my state of self. So I'm excited. As for a little bit of my story, where do I start? That's always the question that I ask because there's so many moving parts to our story. I was 18 years old. I'm 35 right now, and I met. At the time, I had the perception that he was the love of my life, and there was something just about him. He had these green eyes, and this beautiful brown hair, and he was built, and there was just this connection. There was this energy between us, and I was just instantly hooked to him. And we dated for about, oh my goodness, it was about 7 years, 7 years off and on. And it was the first year, everything was beautiful and vibrant and free. And, we did a lot of things together as a couple, and we experienced a lot. And there was a lot of love and passion and all those beautiful things that happen in the beginning stages of a relationship, right? And it was probably about a year into the relationship where I started seeing the signs. There was the jealousy that started to rise up, and um, there were things that came up where my body was like, okay, this doesn't feel safe, but I still trusted him because I've built that relationship with him for a year. So there were so many moving parts to that. And I remember in particular when he started just telling me that I couldn't do things. And I was like, okay, this doesn't feel right. Because for me and who I am, I'm very independent, right? I've really grown up within the family dynamics where I was always allowed to use my voice. I was always allowed to be seen. I guess from the outside looking in, you could say that I was very strong. I was a strong woman. I would come into this room and there would just be this energy about me. You would just want to like have this, connection with me. And it was probably, again, the first year in where my family started noticing the signs. My family started asking me questions. They're like, what's going on with you? You're showing up differently, right? They were calling me forward, calling me out. And, at the time, I'm really close with my family too. And I wanted to say something to them, but I was like, hey, maybe Melissa, you know what? You're okay. Nothing's happening. It's just the mind. Then I didn't know it was just I thought it was then the mind. And And then they just started questioning me and questioning me. And then that's where I noticed that I just, all of these lies just started piling up, right? It was like lie after lie after lie. And it probably was about the second year in where the domestic violence started to kind of come into the picture, where he started to put his hands on me and used to say very inappropriate things. And just give me a minute. So I haven't shared this part in so long. So there's some depth to it. I'm feeling some emotions right now too. So just bear with me. I'm exposing myself in so many ways right now. Um, so basically, what happened is a few years into a relationship, this was happening back and forth. And there was a lot of codependency and there was a lot of lack of self awareness. And I really attached my worth to all of the words in which he had said to me. And as a result, I operated out of that system. I started disconnecting with my family and I didn't really do the things that I loved. And I started to, I guess you could put me in a category. I was very introverted, which was the opposite of who I was. So it was like I was just becoming someone else. I had no idea who I was becoming. And I was just segregating myself away from absolutely everyone. And I just felt lonely. Even though he was here, I just felt lonely. And so it was probably a few years in when this was happening. And we ended up having my beautiful child that I have now, Cohen. So thankful for him. And that's where I started noticing that it started to get worse.
Okay.
It started to get worse over time. And, my family started to recognize the signs and they started to ask me like, what's happening? Why do you have bruises in these areas? And again, what we do is we try to protect ourselves and I lied and that lie just perpetuated over time. And it got to a point where I had so many lies that I didn't even know what was true.
Yeah. So you really like lost yourself between the lies and the reality, that it just became like one mix.
Yeah. And I love how you said that, because my reality, was very foggy.
Mm.
And I dismissed it. Like my perception was really foggy and I didn't even know who I was. My friends noticed it, my family noticed it. And again, this just became a perpetuated cycle over and over and over again. And I remember him saying like, no one's going to love you the way that I love you. No one's going to want to be with you. And then he would point out different aspects of my body that he perceived as ugly. And I would focus on that over and over and over again. And I started to hide myself in my clothing as well. So, and even sharing this story, it's a little bit foggy because there was so much trauma that was involved, of course. So as I'm bringing it up, I'm starting to feel it a little bit. So, and so we had a child, going back to that, we had a child. And then at the hospital in particular, there was this just massive blowout with my family, because my family ended up calling him out saying like, this is what we're seeing, what's happening. And he exploded in the hospital. And it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. He started arguing with my family and calling them names in front of the doctors and in front of the nurses. And I was just like horrified. I was humiliated. And the innocent part of me and the part of me that had this codependency really just leaned on him and not my family. And I could tell that my relationship with my family, we started to separate. And family is a massive value of mine. So again, I started to feel even more alone. And it got to a point where, I went home that day. I remember going home that day and I started asking myself, like, what am I doing? Like, is this the life that I want? And when a child comes into this world, and as a mother, we're here to protect them. We just have this like organic, natural way just in which we want to protect our children. And I noticed that coming up and I was like, I need to protect this child. Like I need to do something for this child because this is not an environment that this child can live into. And I didn't leave then. The thoughts were coming up, but I didn't leave. And, took quite a long time. So what I noticed too is that the cycle started to get worse and worse. And he actually ended up hitting me with my child in my arms. And I fell to the ground.
Yeah.
And I remember, I'm probably going to have some tears right now. I remember falling to the ground and just having this little newborn baby in my hands and just in a ball, just crying, just feeling, sorry, just give me a minute.
I wasn't tearing up here.
Just feeling hopeless. And I still didn't leave. And I still didn't leave. And I still didn't leave. And this happened over and over and over again. And I'll get to the moment where everything changed. And so I'll move forward a little bit. A few years later, I lived into this for about 4 years. So my son was 4 years old. And there's power and potency here, and I really want to share this part because this was the moment for me. And I remember my son. I ended up moving at the time, and he was living with me. He was in and out. He was in and out because he was drinking excessively. And then there was, he wasn't necessarily diagnosed, but I noticed he had a lot of anxiety, and there were just signs of depression. I just noticed a lot of those things started to arise and come forth. And I remember my mother was at our new place with my 4-year-old son. And I'm smiling right now because I'm feeling this feeling of when I decided. And I remember driving to the restaurant to get us dinner. My mom was over, my son was there, and we were going to get some dinner. And I remember sitting in the parking lot waiting to pick up the food. And I remember looking down, and I was looking at my phone, and there was all of these messages just coming in, like, you're disgusting, you're ugly, no one's going to want you, you're worthless. And it was just coming through nonstop. And I remember just sitting in my car, just in tears, like just my entire body was shaking and I was in tears. And I remember just taking a deep breath and then putting my phone down. I didn't respond. And I ended up driving home, just, crying and thinking, like, why me? Because we live into that, right? Like, why me? Why is this happening to me? Like, what do I need to learn? What's the lesson here? And I remember asking myself that. And I brought the food into the house, and at the time it was a downstairs basement apartment, and I walked downstairs, and I remember looking at my mother. Excuse me. I remember looking at my mother, and sorry, I just got something in my throat. My apologies. I remember looking at my mother, and she looked at me, and she's like, "Are you okay, honey?" And I said, "Yeah, Mom, I just need a minute. Just give me a minute." She's like, "Are you sure you're okay?" And she knew at the time. I ended up telling my family a few years in. And I was like, "Yeah, Mom, I just need a minute." She's like, "Okay, sweetie, I'll take Cohen, and you just go in the room." And so I went into the room, and there's this little fireplace in my room, this beautiful little fireplace. And I remember walking into the room, and my son's like, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." And I'm like, "It's okay, honey. I'll just be a minute." He's like, "Mommy, mommy." I'm like, "Just be a minute." But there's significance to this. So I shut the door, and I went over, and I walked over to the bed, and I sat down on the bed, and I looked at the fireplace, and I remember just tears started rolling down my face. It's like I gave myself permission to just feel all of it. And it was a different type of feeling. It was a completely different type of feeling. The first feeling that I had when he was texting me was like a why me energy, right? It was intense. There was a lot of contraction. I remember this. It's so surreal to me. And then when I was sitting in front of the fireplace, it was more of like a free, expansive, spacious, vast energy. And I remember looking at the fireplace, and I sat up, and I said, "I'm done. I'm done." And I just decided. And I remember, oh my goodness, I can feel it in my body right now. I'm smiling ear to ear, is that the energy just left my shoulders. They just left my shoulders. I just felt it. I just decided, and this is the moment for me. So I walked out of that room so empowered. Like, I remember my shoulders being back, and I was feeling so empowered and so ready. And my son ran over me. He's like, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." And I went down on my knee, and I said to him, I said, "We'll be okay." At the time, he had no idea what that even meant, obviously, or the interpretation of it. But I remember looking at him, and I'm gonna cry. And I remember saying, "We'll be okay." And that day, everything, I never went back.
Yeah.
My mom had no idea what I was talking about either. But, I never went back. And that's what changed everything for me. Everything.
You know what you did there in that moment is you broke the cycle for yourself and your son and your whole family. In that moment of clarity, that was obviously a process of arriving there, right? You cannot force to feel that freedom,
Mm-mm.
but what you just described of leaving the negative energy, leaving your body, your spirit, is so empowering. It's like profound for starting your new life.
Yeah.
That I mean, I have no words for that. It's
Oh, I know. I'm trying to take a moment in too, because, and I love that you said that too, right? Generations, I stopped that. And, I didn't see that then. And if you don't see it, I mean, at the beginning, before I decided, if you don't see it, you can't change it. And I saw it and I changed it. And that's where everything shifted for me. And I'll move over a little bit more in regards to like what happened as a single mother. So I decided, and I remember that night just being such a beautiful night. Like I was connected with my mother and I felt so present. I remember the conversations that was happening. Um, that's how aware I was and how awake I was. And I didn't look at my phone. I didn't look at the messages. I just left it in my purse and I was completely connected within the energy and the embodiment. And it was just a peaceful and free space to be into. And I've never, ever, ever in all my years felt that feeling. The feeling that I was longing for, not realizing it then, but talking about it now, it's like that was the feeling that I was longing for. So after that, my son was 4 years old and I became a single mother. Oh my goodness, is that scary? Oh my goodness. And it's it's scary, but I also had an island. I had an island of support. And I always say it takes an island to raise children. Thankfully, I had that. I know a lot of women out there do not have those resources and do not have that support. So that really supported me on walking on my 2 feet. It's not like I was crumbling in a sense, but I also felt free and supported at the same time. So I remember, this is powerful too. I remember deciding, I'm like, what's my next step? Like, where do I go from here? I was 24 years old. I had no education. I wasn't allowed to go to school. I wasn't allowed to go to college. I wasn't allowed to be seen. I was segregated and I had a lot of codependency. There's a lot of tendencies that I had as a result of being in that relationship. And so I was like, where do I go? Where do I start? And that question alone is scary. People talk about a micro vision and that's scary too, but this was my micro vision this was my macro vision in a micro moment.
Love
So I was
that.
like, how do I do this? Like, this is so big. This is beyond what I can see. How do I do this? And I remember looking online for courses in counseling. I didn't realize it then. I didn't realize it that I wanted to support and help women throughout their journey. But I was really intrigued by counseling. So I remember looking at it and I was like, oh, I'm going to choose that. So I ended up signing up online. And it was a night school course because I was a single mother and my parents were open to supporting me. And it was the most petrifying and terrifying feeling of having to go to school alone. But I remember walking into the college petrified, like big sweater on so no one could see me, right? And I had my hood on, and I remember walking in, and I was right in front of the desk, and the woman looked at me, and she just like looked at me, and I'm like, oh, I'm here to start this course. She was like, oh, you didn't get the phone call? And I was like, what do you mean? Did I not get the phone call? And she's like, well, we canceled this course because there wasn't enough people that signed up. Getting the courage and the bravery to take that first step And then that's what happens as a result. There was two choices that I had there. There was one choice that I could have crumbled and went back deeper into my sweater and walk away. Or the second choice is I sat up and I asked her, what else do you have available for me? And I chose the second choice.
Amazing.
And, she looked at me and she's like, oh, what do you mean? And I said, what do you have available? Like,
Yeah.
what's on this sheet right now? Like, what courses do you have? And she's like, I have addictions. Right? I have addictions. It's called concurrent disorder, which is mental health and substance use. I have addictions. And I'm like, okay, just put me in. And she's like, okay. So I remember walking into the classroom, in my sweater. My hood was off at the time, so I could felt empowered. I was like, oh, I just made a decision, right? And making a decision for someone who has been in a domestic relationship is the most powerful and potent experience that any human being can have. Like just one decision, knowing that you have knowledge now, and knowledge brings you choice.
Mm. Yeah.
So I ended up walking into the room. The teacher looked at me because, I was a little bit late because I had to figure out what course was for me. I walked in and there was nurses and there was doctors and there was physicians and there was people of, that have had an education for a long period of time. And I sat at the back and I was in that course for about a year. So there's significance to this. I was in that course for a year. So we did mental health, and we did, there was substance use, and then they combined the two. So it was like a year course. So what I noticed over time is that I wasn't supposed to be there. You actually had to have a prerequisite before you go in there. So the woman that signed me up didn't know that I didn't have any education before, which means that which means I wasn't supposed to receive the certification. Mm-hmm. So it was probably about 6 months into the course, and I had the conversation with the teacher, and she's like, you're not supposed to be here. You have no education prior to. And that conversation woke me up, and that was scary at the same time. And she ended up giving me the certification. I don't know what she did. I don't know what she saw in me, but she saw something in me that someone hasn't seen in me for a very long time. Yeah. And when someone sees you and holds space for you, like you've never experienced before, there's something that happens in you. It's like a visceral cellular feeling. And I decided from there to transition into social work. So I went from the certification program to college. Yeah. And that's really where my journey began. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. What a story of awakening and becoming conscious and finding yourself of what you want without someone, like mm-hmm. This is incredibly inspiring to hear, because you really came like as a person, as a mother, as yourself, and as a professional, such a long way. Yeah. Isn't it? Like, I mean, now you help women who, go through very difficult phases in their life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How does that, what you have experienced, how does that help you to help those women?
Yeah. I love that question. There's this, I always say that I have an innate gift. I see people that like no one else sees people. There can be someone, and I have always had this gift, but I believe my experience woke it up. Because I can walk down the street and it doesn't matter. I will never judge a book by its cover. And I can look at you and have a full conversation with you and see you like no one has seen you before. And it's funny because a lot of my, the women that I support in particular say that. They're like, you hold space like no one has ever held space for me. And that has been really what has supported me. Excuse me, sorry. Sorry. I guess they say when you're sharing more of your voice, these things start to happen with the body, yeah. Right? We know that. Yeah. So now
I also see that in my work. Yeah.
And I know that in somatic therapy too. I'm like, a lot of things are moving in my body right now. So bear with me, whoever's watching and listening right now. It's just things happening in my body. There's a releasing, there's a letting go. I love that you say that too. I'm like, oh, this is happening right now. But yeah, that's been the innate gift that I've brought really into my containers. And, I was in social work for a bit. I was in crisis intervention. and talking about holding space. And I really want to stay here because I think this is really important. Crisis intervention is when, women come in and out. And it's usually there's domestic violence, there's substance use, and there's a lot of other moving parts that happen as a result. And these women, when they come in crisis, they're in fight, flight, and freeze mode, right? They're in the trauma response. So, someone that's in that response and is just looking to feel safe doesn't really necessarily want to have a conversation with you, especially as a social worker. If anything, they want to run far away from you, especially if they have a history of not feeling seen, a history of not feeling supported, a history of not feeling safe, a history of not feeling free. One thing that I would always do with the women in particular within the agency was I would actually sit down and have lunch with them. Okay, yeah. No other social worker would do that. And I would sit with them and I would listen to their stories, and you would see their entire body language just speak its own story. As soon as they felt seen, as soon as they felt heard, it was as if their shoulders went back, their voice, the tone of their voice was a little bit lighter. They were a little bit louder. Like, those were the moments for me where I was like, I can do this. I can do this. It's not about sitting down, and giving them all the resources. That's powerful and potent because that's the next step. But the first step, if you can sit there and see someone like no one has seen you before, but even before they even take the action step, they've already decided to be within your energy, to be within your space, for you to listen to them. That alone is potent. And if you can do that for someone, you've already won.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And I love that you did that by creating that space at lunch, because you don't need to sit like in front of each other. Now we talk, you just eat. You have a different physical experience when you eat. It also is soothing, and it's, filling, but it's also a bit distracting. So you don't have to go into the details and in the uncomfortable stuff when you are in that trauma response. But I also see that with kids. I mean, I have a 5-year-old, and it's difficult to talk about difficult stuff with kids. The more the conversation is like a side conversation. We are in the car, he's in the back, we talk a bit about what we see, and then it's like, and what happened today with Chris in kindergarten? I heard there was a conflict. It's different than we're like, okay, guy, now we need to sit and talk and see what happened today in kindergarten with Chris. It's like, let me give you a massage, or let's have a snack, let's have a tea. And, we're just enjoying ourselves. And then it's a bit like, what happened? I love that you had this intuition, even though none of your coworkers had that strategy with newcomers, new incoming clients. It's great. Yeah, I'm sure it helped.
And, that was the moment for me where I decided, I loved being in crisis intervention, but I slowly transitioned because I thought, there's a lot of moving parts on a macro level that I necessarily can't fill. There's a lot of gaps. So I asked myself, how can I, bridge in those gaps?
Yeah.
And I knew that within that agency in particular, and many other agencies, that I wasn't the person, and it didn't feel good to be that person to bridge in those gaps. So I ended up leaving crisis intervention, and I ended up transitioning slowly into coaching.
Okay.
And I slowly transitioned into coaching. But for me, in particular, there was this woman that I was really, really attracted to. It was her voice. It was her presence. She also had, it's happening in the body again. It's coming up. She also had a background in therapy as well. And she was on this podcast, and she was sharing her truth and her story. And I was just, I remember closing my eyes, just listening to her. And at that point in time, I needed a change. We all know when our energy is a little bit wobbly, when we're feeling stagnant, right? We all know that we're going off the course, whatever that looks like, or off the path, right? It's really just about coming back and, centering ourselves and grounding ourselves. And I knew then when I was listening to the podcast, I'm like, this woman is speaking directly to me. I feel as if I'm having a conversation with her. So I ended up signing up for her course. I didn't know her. I never had a conversation with her. There was just something about her. I trusted her. I trusted myself. I was ready, right? We talked about my story when I decided looking at the fireplace. It was the exact same feeling, the exact same feeling. And I remember signing up for her course, and I did her course, which was so powerful. And then a year later, she opened up. It was like it was a mastery certification program for clients, for coaches. My apology. And I thought, this is it. This is it. This is for me. Like, I'm ready. I was already ready, but like, I'm ready, right? So I ended up going into her course, and I met the most incredible people, and my voice started to get a little bit louder. And, when I slowly transitioned, for me, what I noticed is I started bringing a lot of my healing over. But there's a difference between a therapist and a coach, right? And I really had to separate the two. So that was me relearning how to separate the two, because I had noticed that I was slowly bringing into my containers. But there was also a correlation within the women that were in my containers, is that they were more into the intellect opposed to connecting with the body. Mm-hmm. And I thought, there's something here. There's something here that I want to tap into. There's something here that I know if women start to come home to the body, start to come home to self, start to come home to nature again, there's this feeling of bliss. There's this feeling of actually being in the here and in the now, opposed to being in the intellectual mind. And that's when I ended up started to learn about somatic therapy.
Yeah.
And I learned about, right? I was like, this exists? Like, yes. Does this exist? Like,
it's like this intuitive thought of, there's something wrong. There's not a direct line or connection anymore with that women have. How can we reconnect that? And somatic therapy is amazing when it comes to it. It helps so much being in the line with yourself. But I mean, tell me how you help women with this.
Yeah, I love that. So, it's body wholeness. I talk about it as body wholeness. So there's different types of self, right? We all focus on the other different types of self, right? But like the behavior self, the emotional self, the mental self, right? We talk about the spiritual self. There's different types of self, but it's really just about the wholeness, like bringing all parts of self together. And I think a lot of people miss the body self, right? And we don't realize that the emotions connect with the body, right? So for me in my containers, it takes quite a bit of time for women to reconnect with their body. So we test things out, right? We test things out, and I call it felt sense, right? So felt sense is really just about slowly just feeling the body again, coming home to the body, right? I'm doing it right now. I don't know if people can see me. Right? And just feeling the body. And then people are like, women in particular are like, I've never ever experienced anything like that, right? Like, and I can give the example of fear, right? Fear is a natural, organic human emotion that we're all going to experience, right? It's just there to keep us safe. It's very innocent, but it has its priority, and it has its goal, and it's there to support you and to protect you. So oftentimes when it comes up within my containers, when I coach women in particular, and I usually coach coaches, or I coach entrepreneurs, or I coach women just on a self-discovery journey. So what I tend to do is when it starts to come up, right? The fear starts to come up. I always encourage them. I'm like, let's just sit here for a moment. And this isn't easy for everyone. There's a lot of resistance that comes up. So I'm like, let's just sit here for a moment. This is my holding space. And let's just move through this emotion. Let's fear the feeling of fear, because if we're feeling some sort of fear around, let's just say insecurity, right? There's insecurity. What's underneath insecurity? It's security. It's just about parting the clouds, right? So we can actually get to the security. So we can actually embrace it and feel it. So within this, it's about feeling the sensations within their body, feeling the fear, connecting with it. And what I often say to them is like, where are you feeling this in your body? Are you feeling it in your shoulders? Are you feeling it in your chest? Right? Are you feeling it in your throat? And then from there, we start to connect It's just an energy, right? It's just an energy. Emotion becomes an energy. Energy becomes a pattern. Pattern becomes a part of you. This is just about releasing it within your body. And we'll know it's gone when it starts to dissipate over time. But what we do is I focus on this. Let's just say I ask them questions around, let's just say abandonment comes up, because this is a very common one in my containers, the fear of abandonment, especially when we're in business, right? Where we have this fear that, someone's going to say no to us and we're feeling abandoned,
Big
right? And we
one.
know, right? And we know this happens in all areas of your life. And we know it stems from childhood, right? We know this stems from childhood. So I'll say to them, this is a very potent example, as I'll say to them, and I was like, where do you feel this energy in your body? And they're like, oh my gosh, I feel this in my throat. And I'll say, is this a new energy or is this an old energy? And they just take a moment. They're like, this is an old energy. And oftentimes what comes up is a story, but just know with somatic therapy, you don't have to know the story in order to release the energy. But sometimes the story comes up because it's really just about connecting with the body. But when the story comes up, they're able to kind of connect the dots. So what we do with this energy is I'll ask them what shape it is. I ask them to bring a color to it, the texture. And then from there, when it comes up again, let's just say they're in a session with someone, right? And they're supporting someone and the fear of abandonment starts to come up. They can actually attach that energy directly to the fear of abandonment. So they give themselves that moment to feel the energy all the way through, which takes time for it to dissipate. And then as a result, they feel free and they don't make it mean anything about themselves. So it's so powerful.
Yeah, you don't judge it, you just allow it to be there. It is part of you, part of your history. What I love about it, and now it makes sense to me now that you explain it, it's really going into that subconscious level of where does that feeling come from? Because these uncomfortable feelings we feel, whether it is as a coach, as a therapist, as a mother, as a partner, we are triggered like throughout the day by certain incidences or experiences. And when you allow people or women that you work with to give them space to feel it and to question, where is it in your body? I love that you give it a color, or that they give it a color, like a shape, a form, like to really envision the energy they have, that it becomes real, it becomes conscious. And then when you are finding yourself again in this situation, because I mean, the triggers won't go away, it's how we handle them, right? They can deal with it. That's so empowering. They're not anymore like hijacked almost, but they are in control. Isn't it amazing?
Yeah. And I love that you said that. I want to share a quick story with a client because it's so empowering. And I love how you said, feel it. So I often say to my clients, feel it to free it. Feel it to free it. And I have this one woman in particular, and we're walking around, I'm not walking, we're working, my apologies. We're working around body wholeness. Like that's our focus right now. And so for her, her goal in particular is for her to come home to the body, right? There's a lot of patterns that are coming up, such as indulging and avoiding her emotions in particular. And oftentimes we do that, especially if we're not connected to the body. So within our container together, we're just practicing feeling. We're just practicing feeling and reconnecting with the body. So what we've done within the actual somatic field is I've had her reconnect with the feeling of peace. And she actually connects it to a time of her life when she was a child and she felt complete peace and wholeness in her body. That's how she described it. It's like this surreal, innate feeling. So this time when the pattern of indulging comes up or avoiding comes up, she's with herself, right? Because she's consciously aware of it. She's consciously aware that this is present, it's coming up. She will actually feel the feeling of peace, allow it to move through her body, allow it to dissipate, and then she changes the pattern because emotion becomes an energy becomes a pattern becomes a part of us. So we start to recognize that emotion is just an energy and it just wants to be met with love and compassion. That's all. It's just like a little child, right? Think of a little child that comes up to you and hurts their knee. And I'm thinking of my children and your children too. They're like, mommy, that hurts so much. Right. So what we do is we put our arms around them. We're meeting them with love. And, it takes 90 seconds for an emotion to move through your body. 90 seconds. And I mean, I know you know that too, right? And all that is the 90 seconds is like feeling that feeling all the way through. The child runs up to you and you're like, it's okay, honey. You're okay. Mommy, this hurts. And they cry and they let their emotions out. And you're like, are you okay? Not even 2 minutes later, they're like, okay, I'm going to go play.
Yeah. I know.
Right?
It's so empowering to know that.
Yeah.
That this emotion, this physical response to your thoughts or your vision, your pictures in your mind will leave after 90 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. And for anyone listening too, I call it the Russian flush. I'm like, it's just the Russian flush. It's not deep. I like, obviously when it comes to, trauma, it's a different type of feeling and you really need a therapist to hold that type of space for you. But if it's the feeling of not feeling, worthy, we can feel that feeling, right? If it's the feeling of not feeling secure, we can feel that feeling. These are feelings that we can feel within 2 minutes, and then we feel it to free it. And what happens when we free it? How do we show up differently in our lives?
Yeah.
Right? We have this sense of clarity, this sense of alignment. We open up and we have more of a response to connection in our relationships and so much more. But my story, from where I've started to where I am now, I'm a completely different person. And I've had clients in my container where I share where I feel it will support them in their journey when they ask me. And they always say to me, I had no idea. I would not even pinpointed that you would have experienced that just based on your confidence, the way that you speak, the way that you show up. And I'm like, this took 10 years of practice and repetition and allowing myself to feel the fear, allowing myself to embrace it, walking with it, creating an intimate relationship with it, because there have been moments in my life that I've wanted to give up, but I never did. Because the journey, I don't believe it's ever about getting somewhere. It's about being in the moment, in the micro moments, and bringing consciousness to that. Just sitting down with my child as an example and being like, I want to compartmentalize this micro moment right now. So when I'm older, I can look back and be like, this moment was everything to me, not, all of the other things that I experienced, like as a mom, having to do the dishes, having to grocery shop, having to do all the things and all the roles, right? It's about sitting in the micro moment and compartmentalizing. That's what I want to look back in 10, 20, 30 years. I also want to look back and be like, she did it. She's a badass. She did it. She chose herself. And, and as a result, she changed her world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another would.
Yeah, you do, I'm sure. And it took you 10 years, but what you did was to create a lasting change. It will not go away anymore. You will never go back to how you had that, how you have done things. The person you used to be in that codependent relationship, seeing the red flags, but not being able to articulate and to understand what you experience, you will never go back to that. So the amazing thing is that you create this lasting change for yourself, for your family. I mean, now you have a loving partner, you have another child, you have a fulfilling job. It will not go anywhere.
I love that you said that, because I manifested the man of my dreams. I knew exactly what I wasn't going to tolerate anymore. And I knew what I wanted. I knew how I was going to show up in my relationship. And I knew how he was going to show up in a relationship, because I asked all the questions at the beginning. I was not tolerating that behavior or that experience or living within that life, because I knew that I chose to have so much more. And as a result, I manifested. And I always say to women, if I could duplicate him, I would, because he is just incredible. He has all of the qualities that I never had in my first relationship. Like he's very emotional, and he's very loving, and he's very compassionate, and he will give you the shirt off his back. And I've never experienced that in my entire life. So knowing anyone listening right now, I just want you to know that that's possible for you, and let me be that evidence for you. That is absolutely possible. And our family is whole, and our family is beautiful. And I would not change absolutely anything out of my journey. Everything happened for a reason, and I'm very thankful for all of it.
Oh, so beautiful. But most important, how can people reach you? How can women reach you that listen to this now and think, I gotta go to work with Melissa because this is exactly what I need?
I love that. I love that. I really just support women in coming home to their body and coming home to their truth, so they can start to take action from a deep level of self-trust, right? It's really just about being in this space with me and creating so much magic and waking you up to who you are and who you are supposed to be. All we have to do together is part the clouds.
Yeah.
Part the clouds so you can come home to you again. And how people can find me is social media. So Instagram is Melissa, MELISSA.K.Byers. Also on Facebook, Melissa Byers. I have a group that is an intimate group. It's called Healers Rising. It's about personal power, conscious leadership, somatic body integration, and so much more. So
Perfect.
yeah.
I will put all the links in the caption of this episode. And thank you so much for sharing your story today with us.
Oh goodness, thank you so much for giving me this space and other women the space to share their truth. You're creating so much magic in the world, and I want you to know I see you too.
Thank you. Guys, if you like this episode, give me a like and a review. Share it with anyone you think can benefit from listening to Melissa's story. Also, make sure that you follow me for more inspiring stories to come. Until next time at Raw and Real with Stefanie Fernandez. Bye now.